I never expected humiliation to come disguised as a toast. The glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and for a fleeting second, I believed I belonged. Then her voice cut through the air, sharp, deliberate, venomous. My mother-in-law smiled as she announced to everyone that I had married for money. Eyes turned, whispers swirled. My husband said nothing. Heat surged through me, but I didn't flinch, because while they saw a woman desperate for wealth, I held a secret they could never imagine, one that would turn their laughter into stunned silence and their pity into fear. I used to think marriage was a doorway into something softer than the life I built alone. The first months felt like walking through a lighted house at dusk, music in distant rooms, plates clinking, cousins using my name. His mother hugged me with perfume that promised acceptance. I told myself it was the smell of home. I learned small customs, when to laugh, where to stand. I practiced belonging until it almost felt natural. Tonight was our first family anniversary since the wedding, candlelight skating across silverware, a quartet playing songs everyone claimed to remember. I decided the critical glances I caught were tricks of light. I convinced myself I was not auditioning. I was home. At the long table, I took the seat his sister saved, a small throne between Rose's centerpieces. The cousins compared promotions and remodels. I answered questions about the bakery I once managed, minimizing the tech project I'd nurtured for years. Nothing much, I said. Just an old hobby. The lie felt courteous, like taking off my shoes in a stranger's house. Laughter rose and fell around me, but the undercurrent remained. I saw it in the way his mother's gaze skimmed the bracelet I'd bought myself, in remarks about women who know how to marry well. It wasn't hatred, it was arrangement, pretty from a distance, sharp when touched. One sentence I knew could shatter this dream the way a hairline crack ruins crystal. One sentence could shatter this dream. I heard it forming on her tongue already tonight. When the quartet slowed, servers lit sparklers on a cake lacquered in white. My husband's mother stood with her glass. Everyone followed. To family, she said, to honesty. Her voice was velvet over wire. I felt the air narrow, as if a hallway were closing. She thanked the cousins who carried boxes during our move, the sister who picked curtains, the uncle who found a discount on the piano. And of course, she added, to the blessing of partners who bring qualities we may not possess. She let the pause bloom, then studied my face like a mirror. Some bring warmth, some bring grace, some bring good fortune. It might have ended there, but her appetite was certainty. In our family, she continued lightly, we are fortunate people. It's not every day a girl marries into comfort. A few people snorted the eager laugh of those who prefer to be led. My husband's jaw shifted. I watched him measure the cost of interruption. I tasted metal. I set my glass down and folded my fingers together, a ceremony of stillness. She swept the table with her eyes, a queen counting subjects. Some women, she said, know how to pick a winner. The quartet's last note hung and died. Plates stopped clinking. The room held its breath like a theater before the curtain lifts. We all want the best for our son, she went on, and it's lovely when affection and practicality meet. But the word practicality landed like a coin on marble. I felt glances skate across my skin, quick and guilty. I waited for my husband to speak. Silence met silence. We'd rehearsed nothing, yet somehow we had rehearsed this. His hand stayed on the table, warm and heavy, but his voice stayed in his throat, locked behind the teeth of peacekeeping. Love is not a shield when it is afraid. She married well, his mother said finally, kindness sharpened to a point. The cousins understood at once and looked relieved to be told what to think. A few whispered. One aunt lifted her phone to watch without appearing to. I saw myself in the water pitcher, composed, smaller than I felt, already being revised. I could have defended myself. Perhaps that was what they wanted, the flustered denial, the tremor. Instead, I smiled at the cake and counted the roses until my breath matched their number. Weeks ago, I was told to move my grandmother's casserole dish from the open shelf because it lowered the tone. How easily a life is curated out of existence. How quickly gratitude learns to heal. When I rose, it was only to steady a tilting candle. The wick righted and the flame steadied, a small discipline. To family, I said soft enough to be owned by everyone and no one. No one noticed the tremor in my hand. They watched her, waiting for the stroke. She raised her glass higher, triumphant over the silence she had built. "Let us drink," she pronounced, to truth. And with that, I knew the trial had begun, that the charge had already been read, that the verdict would be decided by volume, not evidence. I realized I had become the main character in a courtroom with no lawyer and no defense. The silence after that dinner clung to me like smoke. I let them think I was broken, that the weight of their whispers had bent me into silence. Each day that followed, I played the fragile wife. I let his mother direct me in the kitchen as if I'd never handled a knife, smiled politely when she corrected my posture, and lowered my eyes whenever his sister hinted that I had no career of my own. They mistook stillness for weakness, quiet for surrender. I let them, because I needed them blind. Inside, my thoughts pulsed with something they couldn't see. Every remark, every smirk, every silence from my husband carved deeper into me. But I refused to react. My silence wasn't compliance. It was construction. While they laughed at their own cruelty, I built scaffolding no one noticed. I told myself, let them believe I am harmless. Let them write me into the role of decoration, because the more invisible I appeared, the more powerful I became. They had no idea that every condescending look only sharpened the edge of what I was preparing. Nights became my sanctuary. When the house quieted, I sat at my desk in the study they believed I used for writing thank you notes. My screen glowed with code and contracts, investors and prototypes. My so-called hobby was a living organism, a tech startup that pulsed with momentum while they slept. The world they thought I had abandoned for marriage was alive and expanding, hidden in plain sight. I signed agreements under my maiden name. I built alliances across cities they would never visit. I answered questions at investor calls in whispers, the soundproof door keeping my other life intact. My empire thrived, unseen. The irony was almost sweet. The very silence they interpreted as weakness was what allowed me to move freely. They thought I was shrinking when I was only shifting, hiding an arsenal beneath my smile. Their pity became my camouflage, their scorn my perfect disguise. And the more they ignored me, the stronger I grew. I sometimes wondered if they could sense it, if his mother ever paused and felt the hum of something vast beneath my skin. But she never looked close enough. Arrogance kept her blind. One evening, after another round of subtle barbs over dinner, I slipped upstairs early. My husband assumed it was fatigue. He didn't ask questions. Perhaps it was easier for him to let me vanish than confront the truth that his silence had become complicity. I closed the door, opened my laptop, and stepped into the world where I wasn't his wife or her daughter-in-law, but a founder, a strategist, a player on a board far larger than the dining table downstairs. Numbers glowed on the screen, millions in potential acquisition value. My heart steadied. This was no hobby. This was a weapon. I thought of the dinner toast again, of the way the room had frozen when she painted me a gold digger. I replayed it not to suffer, but to remind myself what was at stake. They believed the story they had written for me, but stories could be revised, and I was already editing the ending. Each contract I signed, each meeting confirmed, each wire transfer scheduled. These were not business moves alone. They were rehearsals for a revelation, a performance designed to shatter their narrative in one devastating strike. Weeks later, the call came. The deal that had simmered for months was about to close. The acquisition, valued at $5 million, was no longer speculation. It was a signature away from reality. My throat tightened as I scrolled through the final terms, not with fear but with anticipation. I remembered the smirks, the whispers, the silence of the man who should have defended me. All of it condensed into one thought. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had buried me beneath insult and judgment, but all the while I had been building a stage beneath their feet. I signed. The electronic pen slid across the screen, finalizing a future they would never have predicted. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor, not the weak woman they dismissed, but someone they would soon struggle to recognize. My empire, hidden until now, had grown teeth, and when the day came to reveal it, I knew their laughter would curdle into silence, their pity into shock. I whispered to myself, almost smiling, "Let them laugh one more time. It will make the silence afterward that much sweeter." They believed my quiet was surrender. They believed wrong. The announcement date was set, and when it arrived, it would not only change me, it would change them forever. Trust has a sound when it breaks. It is not shattering glass, not a scream, but a silence too heavy to breathe through. I heard it the night I realized my husband had been standing beside his mother all along. It came in fragments, overheard conversations on the phone, the pauses he thought I wouldn't notice, the way he rehearsed her lines before she spoke them. I had told myself his silence at the dinner table was weakness. I wanted to believe he was caught between loyalty and love, but I was wrong. His silence had been an answer. His silence was allegiance. One evening I lingered at the top of the stairs, the voices drifting upward like smoke. His mother's tone was thick with satisfaction. "She won't resist. She has nothing. She'll thank us when she signs." And his voice steady, deliberate. "Let her think she belongs. It makes the papers easier later." My blood iced. Every smile, every absent touch, every night he turned to his side of the bed without words, all of it conspired into betrayal. The man I trusted to defend me was holding the door open for the knife. I lay awake that night, staring into the ceiling's darkness. The bed beside me was warm with his sleep, but I had never felt more alone. I had armored myself against his mother's disdain, but I hadn't prepared for his hand pressing against my back, not to steady me, but to push me closer to the edge. "He's not protecting me," I whispered into the silence. "He's helping her bury me." And in that moment, something in me hardened past, breaking. Love, I realized, was not just absent. It had turned into weaponry aimed at me. Days later, the trap appeared in the form of paper. A thick folder slid across the table, dressed up as prudence, as family tradition. "It's standard," his mother explained, her tone dripping with false calm, "a simple agreement to keep our son's assets secure. Surely you wouldn't mind signing. It only clarifies what was always true." My husband's eyes stayed on me, unreadable, but his silence shouted the truth. This was the plan. They wanted me to surrender every right, to reduce my presence to a name on invitations, a ghost in photographs. The woman who had nothing and therefore deserved nothing. I held the pen between my fingers and let them see hesitation. They mistook it for weakness again. My mother-in-law smiled like a dealer watching a novice player fold. My husband leaned closer, almost tender, as if betrayal could wear the mask of affection. "It's just to keep peace," he said softly. Peace. That word had been twisted into a chain around my throat. I bent my head over the page, hiding the flicker of defiance in my eyes, and then I wrote. What they didn't know was that my attorney, my real ally, hidden in the shadows of my other life, had guided my hand. The paper I signed was not the cage they imagined. Buried inside the clauses was a blade sharp enough to cut through every scheme when the time came. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and smiled. My mother-in-law's victory shimmered in her eyes. My husband exhaled in relief. They believed I had surrendered. They believed the trap had closed. And I let them believe, because games are won not by strength, but by timing. What mattered was not this moment, but the one waiting just ahead, the moment when they would discover the cage they built had a door they could never lock, a door that swung both ways. As I rose from the table, I carried the knowledge like fire under my skin. They thought they were playing me, but I had rewritten the rules. And when she signed her name on the corresponding document, so eager to seal my fate, she would never realize she was also sealing her own. The grand hall shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble, every guest dressed in gowns and suits designed to impress. It was the perfect stage, and my mother-in-law knew it. She glided between tables, her smile wide, her voice just loud enough to let the whispers travel. I caught fragments as I passed. Fortunate girl. Security. She should be grateful. She was preparing for her grand finale, the moment she would strike publicly and seal my humiliation beyond repair. My husband lingered at her side, complicit in silence, his eyes flitting toward me with the practiced guilt of a man who wanted to be seen as helpless, though he was anything but. I stood near the back of the room, champagne untouched, my heart steady despite the storm swirling around me. I had rehearsed this moment for months, in every silent night when they thought I was broken. Tonight, the mask would burn away, and I would rise from the ashes they buried me under. When the orchestra paused for a toast, she claimed the microphone with effortless entitlement. "Family and truth," she began, her gaze sweeping the glittering crowd. "That's what we value above all else, and in that spirit we must be honest, even when honesty is difficult." Laughter rippled. Those practiced in her theater of cruelty already knew the script. She turned to me, her expression dripping with counterfeit sympathy. Our son was raised to provide, to protect, to choose wisely, and though appearances sometimes sparkle, it is the foundation beneath that matters. Isn't that right, Claire? Dozens of eyes landed on me. I let the silence stretch. Then I moved. My heels clicked against the marble as I crossed to the stage. She tilted her head, sure she had baited me into collapse. Instead, I reached for the microphone with hands that did not tremble. "You're right," I said, my voice cutting clear through the hall. "Truth does matter, which is why it's time everyone here knows mine." The lights caught the screen behind me as I nodded to the technician. The video began to play, faces in the room turned upward as footage filled the screen. My signature scrolling across a digital contract, the handshake with the CEO of a renowned tech firm, the exchange of documents that finalized the acquisition. The company name glowed in bold letters, accompanied by a valuation that silenced even the loudest whisper. $5 million. Gasps scattered through the audience. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. My mother-in-law's smile collapsed into disbelief, her hands tightening around her glass until I thought it might break. I didn't need to raise my voice. The numbers spoke louder than accusation. "For months," I continued, "I let the story be told about me, that I was here for wealth, that I was here for comfort. But what you never asked was what I had already built, what I carried before I walked into this family. Tonight, I'm no longer silent. Tonight, I reveal the truth you tried so hard to bury." The hall was still. Then it erupted. Applause, exclamations, the shifting tide of opinion moving like a wave I had summoned. Some looked at me with awe, others with envy, but none with pity. For the first time since my marriage began, the weight of their scorn lifted, replaced with the sharp light of respect. The crowd had turned, but the performance was not complete. As I stepped back, my attorney, waiting quietly at the edge of the stage, approached with a folder. He opened it for all to see. Correspondence, signatures, evidence of the legal traps my mother-in-law had constructed. Each scheme, each manipulation, carefully documented. "Every attempt to strip Claire of her rights was illegal," he declared, his voice measured and firm, "and every attempt has been neutralized." My mother-in-law paled. The the control she had wielded for decades, crumbling under the weight of exposure. Guests shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to be aligned with her downfall. My husband's mask cracked, shame, fear, and rage flickering in his eyes. For once, his silence failed him. I felt the shift in the room as power rearranged itself. No longer the outsider, I stood at the center, the narrative rewritten before their eyes. I had been the victim, the outcast, the target of whispers. Now I was the revelation, the phoenix rising, untouchable in the glow of my own fire. And yet, as the applause swelled, I felt a hollow echo inside me. Victory tasted sharp, but not sweet. For all the power I now held, I looked at the man who had promised to stand by me and saw nothing but distance. I realized then that triumph over them did not heal the betrayal that still burned closest to me. I smiled for the crowd, let them cheer, let them believe I had won. But deep down, a truth gnawed at me. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something darker. I thought I had risen free, but the shadow of the next battle was already taking shape. Applause had followed me out of the grand hall, but silence met me at home. The house that once felt too large now pressed in on me, every chandelier a reminder of the spectacle I had just staged. I thought victory would bring relief, but instead it left me hollow. My husband stood in the doorway, his expression carved in stone. He didn't congratulate me, didn't marvel at what I had achieved. His voice was sharp, stripped of affection. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've humiliated my mother. You've destroyed our family's name." I stared at him, the weight of his words heavier than the stares I had endured from his relatives. "Our family's name?" I asked quietly. "Or your pride?" He flinched but did not answer. Instead, he accused, "You wanted power more than you wanted us. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's a stage, and you just set it on fire." His fury was not about the lies told against me. It was about the mask I had ripped off his mother. The truth was unbearable to him because it forced him to choose, and he had already chosen. Not me, never me. Days bled into each other. The house echoed with silence, interrupted only by his clipped words. He avoided me at meals, retreating into late nights out. Phone calls he cut short when I entered the room. Victory, I realized, had poisoned the bond we once pretended was love. I lay in bed at night, the space between us colder than winter. I had won the war in public, but in private, I was losing the one battle I had hoped to keep. "Why does victory taste like ash?" I whispered into the dark, and the silence that followed was worse than any answer. I thought the loneliness was the end of my suffering, but the real wound came when I stumbled across the truth he had buried deeper than his silence. It began with a receipt tucked into his jacket pocket, a hotel far from the city, dinners far more expensive than his tastes ever allowed for me. I told myself it could be business. I wanted to believe it. But the next day, his phone vibrated across the counter, lighting up with a name I didn't recognize. I answered before I could stop myself. A woman's voice spilled through, intimate, casual, as though she had been speaking to him this way for months. "I can't wait until you're free of her," she said. My hand tightened until the phone nearly slipped. The world tilted. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a demolition of the last illusions I had clung to. While I had been battling whispers and claws from his family, while I had been forging my empire in silence, he had been feeding another life, another woman, with money that belonged to us both. He hadn't just failed to defend me, he had replaced me, and he had used me to do it. I confronted him that night, holding the receipt, the phone, the undeniable evidence. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He only looked at me with the cold relief of someone unmasked. "You wanted independence," he said flatly. "Now you have it. Don't act shocked that I wanted mine." My chest tightened, breath shallow. Independence was not the word, it was betrayal, dressed in dignity. His gaze dared me to scream, to collapse, to break. But I didn't. I only stood silent, every ounce of love calcifying into something unrecognizable. I turned away before he could see the tears burning my eyes. I didn't want him to mistake them for weakness. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was the architect of my ruin, the final blade in a series of wounds. And as I closed the door between us, I whispered to myself, steady and certain, the man I once called husband is my enemy now. The night I packed my suitcase, the house was eerily quiet. No arguments, no apologies, no desperate pleas, just silence, as though the walls themselves had given up pretending we were a family. I folded my clothes with steady hands, each item a small declaration that I was done fighting for a place at a table that had never been mine. For too long I had allowed their judgments to shape my reflection. I had begged for scraps of acceptance, mistaking tolerance for love. Now, with the truth exposed and betrayal complete, I no longer cared for their approval. What I needed was not permission, but freedom. When I reached the doorway, he stood there, leaning against the frame. His eyes were tired, hollow, and filled with a defiance that once would have broken me. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. He had chosen his side, and I would not beg him to change it. "So this is it?" he asked, voice low. I met his gaze without wavering. "No," I said softly. "This isn't it. This is the beginning." I walked past him, the suitcase rolling behind me, leaving the echo of my footsteps as the only farewell. The days that followed were heavy with solitude, but this time, the loneliness was not suffocating. It was cleansing. I rented a small apartment overlooking the city skyline, where every morning the sun reminded me that endings can look like dawn. I surrounded myself with my work, with the company that had once been my secret and was now my salvation. For the first time, I wasn't building to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't crafting weapons for revenge. I was creating because I could, because it was mine, because I wanted to live by my own design. The acquisition had given me capital, but more importantly, it had given me a platform. Invitations poured in, conferences, interviews, panels where people wanted to hear not only about my business, but about the storm I had survived. At first I resisted, reluctant to lay bare the wounds of my marriage. But then I realized the power of my story was not in hiding the scars, but in showing how they healed. Each word I spoke turned shame into strength, humiliation into fuel. Women approached me after speeches, some with tears, others with fierce determination in their eyes. "You said what I've been afraid to admit," one whispered, and in her trembling voice, I found the purpose I had been searching for. The whispers that once condemned me now carried my name as a symbol. They no longer said gold digger. They said survivor. They no longer mocked my silence. They praised my resilience. My story spread beyond family halls and private dinners, into magazines and boardrooms, until it became something larger than me. It became a case study, a testament that no matter how deeply buried, the truth could still rise. But power is never without weight. Some nights, when the applause faded and I was left alone with the quiet, I felt the shadow of what I had lost. A marriage, however poisoned, had once held dreams. A family, however cruel, had once promised belonging. The crown I wore now glistened, but its edges cut. And yet, I chose to wear it because its pain was honest, not deceptive. It belonged to me. Months later, I stood on a stage again, but this time not in defense, not in revelation, but in affirmation. I told the crowd what I had finally learned. I don't need the title of wife to validate me. I don't need to sit quietly to be respected. What I need is the life I've built with my own hands, the legacy no one can strip away. My voice did not shake. The applause rolled through the hall like thunder, but I didn't need their noise to believe my words. When I looked out at the sea of faces, I didn't see judgment anymore. I saw reflection. People who had been broken, diminished, silenced, waiting for permission to rise. And I gave it to them the only way I knew how. by standing tall in the ashes of what was meant to destroy me. As I left the stage, a journalist asked me one final question. What do you say to those who still doubt you? I paused, let the silence stretch, and smiled. If one day you're misjudged, belittled, or betrayed, will you stay silent, or will you rise as I did? The answer was not mine to give, it was theirs.